Yes, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Faffing Over Frequency podcast. I actually don't know what episode it is, but big thank you to anyone who stuck around in the last episode. A little lapse of judgment, lapse of concentration on my end, basically resulted in a little bit of an audio issue. It's just quite echoey. This room, this studio, office, study, whatever you want to call it, is quite echoey naturally, and when someone doesn't click start recording on OBS, so the Blue Yeti's not picking up any audio and it's only being recorded on the Osmo, and this is without an Osmo mic. Yeah, those two, the echo and the far away mic, they don't really go hand in hand. So hopefully, if you were able to stick around and make out my audio, I don't think it was that bad. It was audible. You could hear me, but it just wasn't the nicest thing to listen to or the clearest thing. But if you did manage to make me out, if you did stick around to the end of that episode, that was about it has your intensity. Is your training intensity holding you back? That's what that topic of that was, which I think is a valuable topic. So little plug, maybe you should go listen to it. Maybe give the first minute a go, and if you can hack the audio, it's definitely a valuable one to listen to because I think nowadays it's preached a lot, especially in the UK bodybuilding scene, that it's about intensity, all or nothing. You know, your intensity has to be a badge of honor. If you're not feeling a rep in every set, you know, you're not getting buried by something, you're not sticking on train by JP audio before your set, what are you even doing? What's the point of going to the gym? You're not bodybuilding. But, you know, there's different approaches with basically everything apart from a few things in the enhanced side or the assisted realm of bodybuilding, like not using DNP or not using 10 grams total load. There is basically 1,000 ways. What is this saying? There's more than one way to skin a cat, but there's so many ways to skin a cat. But finally, diving into the topic of this week's podcast, I think I can call it this week's podcast. Actually, no, it would be another 2 weeks between episodes. It is currently Thursday, the 30th of July. Hopefully, we'll get this one out on Saturday morning because the Lifestyle Loops have a very, very big guest on tomorrow or on Saturday, and we're posting a question box. We're revealing it tomorrow, so gonna keep the hype on the Instagram story for that question box, and you will get a podcast on Saturday from myself, and the Sunday Lifestyle Loops drop. So today's podcast is about cardio. Now, I made a little post on Instagram, a little reel. I'm enjoying these reels of, you know, a few slides, a few training clips, a bit of physique posing with sort of like an eye grabbing or attention grabbing line. And it was basically about your lack of cardio in the off season is making you a worse bodybuilder. So hear me out. A lot of people will do their cardio in a deficit, like most things, like most variables in their bodybuilding. People will be on the ball in a deficit. They will do everything that they can to maximize their progress or the result of that diet. But when they get back into a gaining phase, the short term gratification of daily physique change and improvement isn't there. They fall off with things. So this is why people actually, you know, do cardio in their diet, but then they just completely remove it in the gaining phase when it's arguably, and what I'm gonna try and make the argument for, it's more important in the gaining phase than the dieting, which you would think maybe is the opposite because you're dieting, you know, do cardio, burn the calories, get lean, bro. But there's sort of a shift of creating the deficit through food nowadays rather than just bombing your clients, your athletes with cardio. And whereas in the gaining phase, you can recover from the cardio. It's going to keep you healthy, and it's ultimately needed to keep up sort of biofeedback and biomarkers as body weight starts to rise. But let's first of all get into cardio's role. So as I've sort of just touched on, in a gaining phase, cardio is for your health, for your fitness. You know, keeping your resting heart rate down, keeping you fit so you can continue to train at maximum capacity. You can do higher rep sets, you can recover in between sets, and you can do a decent amount of volume in your sessions. A lot of people think, you know, you don't need any aerobic sort of, you don't need an aerobic gas tank to lift weights, but it's maybe not in the set, because you can get away with just doing 8 rep sets and grow the same, no doubt about that. But it's making it to the end of that 20 set leg day, or recovering inside 3 or 4 minutes between your next set of leg work, your next set of hack squats. Whereas if you're not doing your cardio, you're not making it to the end of that, because that session you're going to be averaging your heart rate at 140 bpm. You're going to be taking 5-6 minutes between sets. You're going to eventually cool down, and your performance is going to take a hit. So yes, we're dropping the resting heart rate. We're keeping healthy. This is especially applicable to assisted athletes in the gaining phases. Their gaining phase, not the gaining phase. Specific application to the assisted guys with their health being a bit more on the line or at risk. The naturals do still need it though. If you are pushing your body weight up 30, 40, 50 pounds as a natural, you're not going to be as fit. Your resting heart rate is going to tick up, while you don't have maybe the risk of as much heart enlargement and stuff like that as an assisted guy. It's this argument of things change so much when you're assisted versus natural. It's silly. You should really try to uphold the same standards, what regardless of what you identify as, whether you're pinning needles in your delts or not. You know, we're bodybuilders. Uphold your execution of the process to the best possible standard. Now, health and fitness is one rule of cardio in a gaining phase. We also have to consider that it is a sort of regulator of appetite and insulin sensitivity. So, regulator, if you want to say that, it's a tool that's going to uphold your appetite. If you're not moving, if your caloric burn is minimal outside of your training session, you know, your appetite's going to take a hit. If you don't naturally have a very, very large appetite, I can guarantee low steps, low to no direct cardio, your appetite is going to hit a brick wall, hit a dead end with appetite in your gaining phase very, very fast. Then insulin sensitivity, we've talked about that a lot. A lot of my content does revolve around this insulin sensitivity buzzword. Being responsive to your food, utilizing your food well, and just not being a slob. So the sort of idea behind the upholding insulin sensitivity, if you're doing cardio, you know, you're burning calories, you're going to maintain a better body composition, a leaner body composition, which is going to line up naturally with a more insulin sensitive sort of environment. You're also dropping your blood sugar for that period of time when you're doing your cardio, because it's going to be more glucose glycogen intensive than our weightlifting. So that's creating the demand for the carbs, the carbohydrate load that you're eating day to day. And ultimately, when you eat carbs after that blood glucose drop, you're going to utilize them better, because your body's actually going to be in need for them. And overall, with the cardio, we're aiming to create this high energy flux. This is another sort of buzzword, if you will, that I've touched on a lot, because I do see real application of these two different fluxes to how people go about their process. Someone with a high energy flux, so burning a lot of calories through cardio, steps, training, they're going to visually look better, look leaner, hold a leaner composition, and eat more, because they move more. And I think because you're moving more, the more that you are eating, that bit of extra food, those extra calories, those extra carbs are going to be utilized. So I think being high on both of those intake and output sort of variables is far, far better than being on the opposing end, which is a low energy flux, where because you only do 5,000 steps a day, you do 4 or 5 training sessions a week, but you do no direct cardio, you're not really getting anywhere with your food. You're only going to get maybe 300, 350 grams of carbs on a training day. Since your body's not sort of creating that demand for food, the little food that's actually going in isn't, um your body's not going to utilize it as well because it's not sort of demanding that for recovery. So overall, I think cardio in a gaining phase, if it's neglected, it does create result in a worse visual and worse training performance. I think it does create a worse bodybuilder when, this small little thing of just 2 3 cardio sessions a week, when it's neglected, when step count is neglected, you're going to be a worse bodybuilder for it. Now, on the other hand, we have dieting. So we've obviously got the two main phases in bodybuilding: gaining and dieting, and a lot of things do sort of change between them, because cardio wise is sort of the complete opposite. The role of cardio in a diet is the complete opposite, really, to gaining, because body weight is coming down naturally as we diet. These factors, these biomarkers, this biofeedback all starts to improve. Appetite starts to improve in a diet because you're obviously eating less. Insulin sensitivity increases in a diet because body weight's coming down, body fat's coming down, carbohydrate load is coming down. Naturally, more insulin sensitive. Rest and heart rate's dropping in a diet because you've got less body weight. Your heart doesn't have to work as hard. So all these little factors working to aid these biomarkers, this biofeedback in a gaining phase. It's all sort of dealt with by the deficit itself, or the body weight drop, body weight reduction in a diet. So cardio becomes solely for fat loss and calorie burn, burning enough calories to drive that deficit alongside your intake, because there are two main tools as naturals. We have food, our intake, and we have cardio, which is our output. So there we have to play with them, increase output to burn more calories, decrease input or intake to create the deficit, keep us in a deficit. And when we don't have these sort of fat burning tools, we have to rely on them. Someone, if you go to the assisted side of things, you've got plan, thyroid medication, GLP-1 medications, all these things to sort of aid with fat loss and body composition. Us natural guys, we've got a calorie deficit. We've got doing more minutes on the spin bike and eating a bit less rice. But moving on to how I prescribe cardio for myself and clients. So gaining phase, we're gonna go through this again phase by phase, gaining versus diet. And so ideally, I am always getting clients to do fasted cardio. That is both gaining and in a deficit. Fasted cardio, I am a big believer in this, and I will never sort of back down. I know there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and I do acknowledge that, because I say, it's not the end of the world if you can't get your cardio done fasted, pardon me. But if you can get it done fasted, I think it's going to be a lot more beneficial. Let's think of your body in the fasted state. It's, blood sugar lower in the morning where you haven't put in any food. So you go to do that cardio fasted with no fuel added in. What's it going to be utilizing as fuel? Bit of glycogen, body fat mainly. Hopefully, it's going to, since you've put no food in, your blood glucose is going to be low, and it's going to be even lowered even more, I should say, when you do that fasted cardio before your first meal. Because say you do cardio after 2 meals, your blood glucose has risen that little bit because you've put in them 2 meals. Even if they're carb free meals, you're still going to get a bit of an insulin spike in your bloodstream, because stuff like protein, it's still going to create an insulin spike. Funny enough, it's not just carbs. So ideally, I'm always getting clients to do fasted cardio, because I do think it is a lot more rationale for upholding better body composition. Also, it means In a deficit, you can utilize something like yohimbine, which only works in the fasted state. Now, this is a natural sort of supplement. I would say supplement. It's a very debated one because a lot of coaches think that the side effects, the anxiety, the sort of jitteriness that comes alongside it isn't worth the added fat loss benefit, or the sort of stimulatory side effects, or maybe impact in sleep if the client keeps their or the athlete keeps their stimulant, their caffeine load up. If they don't drop their caffeine and they add in yohimbine, fat loss or sleep could definitely take a hit, and that could affect fat loss. But I had massive success with yohimbine in my previous diet, but could that just be with down to the synergies being touched upon between yohimbine, L-carnitine, injectable L-carnitine, and caffeine? Who knows? That obviously exponentially increased the sort of fat loss or return on investment with the yohimbine. Touching on synergies, it's what a lot of people do in the assisted realm. Why use one drug when we can use maybe three at a lower dose, and get this sort of synergistic effect and get a better result? But I'm blabbing here. We're gaining. We're not going to be using yohimbine. That's for dieting. Don't use fat burners in in your gaining phase. Please don't do that. But I'm typically putting in rest day cardio. Say typically, always. I always put in direct cardio for my guys if they don't play a sport. That is something to note. Not everyone is a competitor. Some people are still trying to balance their physique development with a sport. If they have a sport they're doing frequently, 2, 3 times a week, which is getting their heart rate quite high up, I won't put in direct cardio. I will give them a step goal following my usual sort of guideline with steps, but I won't give them direct cardio. But let's say it's a competitor and putting in rest day cardio, say they train 4 to 5 times a week, which I typically suggest. There's 2, 3 cardio sessions on their rest days, say a baseline of 30 minutes. I don't typically see the need to go above 30 minutes in a gaining phase, since it is just for upkeeping things. There's not a need to burn calories and extend that duration of cardio, maybe increasing a bit of fatigue. There's no need for that. But then below 30 minutes, I just think, what's the point of a 20-minute cardio session? You get on, by the time you get your heart rate up, there's a minute into it already, and you're only keeping it sustained for 20 minutes. Maybe you're burning 200 calories in that. And I just think, for how difficult cardio is in a gaining phase, not difficult at all. By the way, if you thought I was going to go somewhere else with that, you might as well do it for 30 minutes. If I want to titrate their weekly cardio amount up, and I've got rest day cardio in, say someone's on a 5 day split, they've got 2 sessions of 30 minutes cardio, maybe I want to control the rate of gain a little bit, I will add in post workout cardio on their shortest training day of the week. So this usually falls on a push day. The push day can be wrapped up for an hour and 30 minutes for most clients, so it's not hard to stick in 20-30 minutes of cardio post workout. Reason I don't mind this not being fasted is because most people, they have a job. Say they just typically go for the 9 to 5 hours of work. They maybe want to train, let's say, before work, or say they train before after work. You have maybe a 15-16 hour working day or week, 15 or 16 hours where you're awake during the day. That is two sort of times you have to be at the gym, either side. If you want to do your cardio fasted, of course, you're going to have to do that before work, before meal one. Then you have to train in the evenings. That's not giving your client, your athlete, a lot of wind down time or time away from the gym at all. So I think if you're putting in training day cardio, and this is where the rationale comes for me, I think put it in just post workout. Don't worry about getting it done fasted. You have another big commitment that day of maybe 90 minutes plus in the gym. I don't want to be giving you 30 minutes of cardio where you might have to travel to the gym beforehand. So just get it done post workout. No issues, because it is just an extra little bit of cardio. Few benefits to doing post workout cardio. Your heart rate's already going to be elevated. So that takes me on to my next sort of point. I prescribe cardio in the 120 to 140 BPM range. I wouldn't pull that down any. I would actually pull it up, push it up a little bit to maybe a 130 to 140 BPM range. It just depends how aerobically fit the athlete is. If they're very unfit, you can stay 130 to 140, easy, easy, easy. If they're very fit, hitting 130 to 140 is going to be decently taxing on the legs. So that's how I sort of decide on that. But something I do on the gaining phase, in the gaining phase with the cardio protocol that not a lot of people do, there's this debate between HIIT, so high intensity steady state, or high intensity steady state, good lad, high intensity interval training, so HIIT cardio versus less cardio, so low intensity steady state. So HIIT is probably getting your heart rate up above 160, 165, whereas less is this sort of 120 to 140 BPM range. The argument against HIIT is it's too fatiguing, but you can get it done in maybe 10 minutes compared to a 30-minute low intensity steady state session. So it's more time efficient, but more fatiguing. What I like to do is combine the both. I recommend, or I prescribe, I program low intensity steady state for maybe 30 minutes. But the last minute of that cardio in a gaining phase, I want it to be RPE 9-10, where you're sprinting on your modality of choice. So maybe you bump up the Stairmaster to the max level, you're sprinting on the stationary bike, where you're trying to get your heart rate to 170. I think there's a lot of benefit to hitting these high heart rates. And if you're neglecting HIIT cardio, I don't think that you're going to get all the outcomes from this. I think there's definitely rationale to touching the high heart rates, for that additional insulin sensitivity, additional appetite support, and just things like this. And health is sort of the main one. You want your heart to be working hard. You're probably on a leg day, you probably are hitting 150 BPM, but sticking another 20 BPM on that definitely has benefit to it. As for steps, because it is another form of cardio, when we talk about cardio in the off season or diet, or its output in general, we can't skip over steps and just solely think about direct cardio, because the popularization of steps is crazy. Everyone has a step count now. Everyone should have a step count because it can be so meaningful for fat loss and even other things outside of fat loss in the gaining phase. Same as cardio, upkeeping appetite, upkeeping insulin sensitivity, upkeeping digestion. Steps are very key. So I actually prescribe my clients to stay above this bare minimum sort of amount of steps. A lot of coaches will say, hit 8 to 10K steps. They don't even have a single number for you to hit consistently. I like to push that past 10K, maybe 11, 12, 13, depending on the client's occupation. I just think if those steps can be ticked off maybe 4 or 5K fasted in the AM, you're dropping your blood sugar before meal one, mental clarity is through the roof because you're getting outside, getting exposed to sunlight first thing in the morning. Then if you can get the remaining 5, 6, 7, 8K done around meals, that's going to aid insulin sensitivity because you're sort of negating that blood glucose spike that you're having after a meal. You're going to help digestion because you're sort of stimulating the musculature in the stomach, and it's overall just going to be a very good idea to keep your steps higher in the gaining phase in the off season as opposed to running them super low. It's just another little thing where people acknowledge that things have more weight in a deficit, so they'll do it in a deficit. They'll go out for walks randomly. They hit their step goal, whereas in their gain phase, I'm eating the food, I'm getting soft anyway. What's the point of going for a walk? That's not the way to think. I do think there will actually be a notable difference in muscle accrued in a gaining phase if you're on the ball with stuff like steps and cardio, which is the whole purpose of the podcast. Now, prescribing cardio in a deficit. Now, I think it doesn't take a genius to realize this, but the amount is based on needs. It is on a needs basis how much cardio I'm putting in for a client. And that's just the need to ramp up the deficit or continue the deficit. If we see fat loss stall, we can either pull food or we can increase output. Now, this means cardio can be zero for some clients or it can be 2 hours a day potentially. You'll hear a lot of horror stories and preps where people are just absolutely obliterated by cardio. 2 hour sessions a day. Talking one in the AM, one in the PM, and this is just ridiculous amounts of cardio. Whereas there'll be other people where they can just drive fat loss through reducing food, and we've definitely seen a shift of doing that, creating the deficit solely through your intake, because it means no cardio, that's no extra fatigue. And I like to think about it like this: yes, it sucks eating less. Everyone in a deficit wants to eat a bit more cream of rice, a bit more almond butter. But what's more difficult? Actually fatiguing, putting a burden on yourself of cardio, making your legs that bit more heavy, affecting training performance potentially, doing the 30 minutes of cardio, or is it eating a bit less almond butter? I sure as hell know that eating a bit less is the easier choice. So, touching back on the synergies that I mentioned earlier on with a natural sort of setup for fasted cardio, because Yihimbine needs to be used in a fasted state. We could run something like a Yihimbine injectable L-carnitine caffeine sort of mix and get a really good response with fat loss. It's what I done, and I really think there's application if the client is willing to use injectables. I'm never going to force a client down that route as a natural. If they're happy to use Yihimbine, I also would never force a client to use that if they didn't want it, because they've chose the natural route. Maybe they don't want to take any of this sort of foreign stuff that isn't just heart, natural. It definitely feels a bit weird taking a stimulant like Yihimbine. It's just our natty clan. But dieting is when I'd start to touch upon the synergies to get that sort of responsive fat loss. Maybe you've made a change to a client's plan, you've made a change to your own plan where food's low enough where you don't really want to pull it at this stage. Cardio's high enough where you don't really want to increase it anymore and risk dropping off training performance. Let's create this synergy, add in the L-carnitine to help with the fatty acid mobilization part of fat loss, the sort of fat loss process, the beta oxidation process. Let's add in Yihimbine. Let's get these working together, and instead of actually having to tweak the plan of increasing cardio or reducing food, we can actually just create more fat loss, pure fat loss from touching on these things. So training performance is upheld, and you're eating, you're not having to eat less food. So hunger maybe a bit more controlled, appetite a bit more controlled, and yeah, can ultimately be a good tool. But this again decides on morals with the injectables and response to something like Yihimbine, because as I said, a lot of people don't like Yihimbine with the side effects of being highly stimulatory and causing this sort of anxiousness. Now, one thing I will say when it comes to prescribing cardio in a deficit for yourself or a client, the metric or modality matters more while dieting. Something like the Stairmaster is going to be a lot more invasive in your recovery capability than a stationary bike or elliptical. I think stairs is great in the off season when you can recover. You're eating a lot of food and you don't really feel that beat upness, especially if it's only 2 to 3 times a week. Absolutely sound. Maybe you're even switching modalities where you're doing maybe one session on the bike, one session on the stairs, one session on the elliptical. Great idea. Whereas if you're in a deficit, food's low, you can't handle a lot of training volume because your recovery capability has took a hit. Your recovery capacity has taken a hit. The stairs can really tax your legs. That's where we're gonna feel these heavy legs. It feels like you've got 20-kilo dumbbells strapped around your ankles. Makes everything that bit harder. Whereas if you compare it to something that's not eccentrically loading, like the stationary bike, it's going to be a lot less invasive compared to the Stairmaster. Now, since I program heart rate to follow as a guideline for clients for the cardio, intensity isn't really a question and calorie burn isn't really in the question, because yes, on the stairs, stairs is harder, perceived as harder, but either modality, bike or stairs, I want the client or myself hitting 120 to 140 BPM on their cardio. So I can assure that calorie burn is not going to drastically change. Have a coach or had a coach not sort of give this rule of thumb heart rate zone, then you would actually notice a sort of dip in fat loss if you swap from stairs to the bike, because stairs you're going to be working a lot harder to just during your cardio compared to the bike, where you don't have to follow a pace, you set your own pace on the bike. So if there's no sort of metric telling you how hard you're working, which is the heart rate in this case, you're just gonna go through the motions on the bike. Now, transitioning from a gaining phase to a diet, I figured this would be a decent little one to touch upon. There's a lot of people will ask in Q&As, maybe in podcasts that I'm listening to, it's how to know if I should drop food or increase cardio when going into my deficit, or even a change in the plan when you're already in a deficit. Should I take away more food and drive the deficit even further, or should I add in cardio? I think out of the gates, if your client has a good appetite, ending their gaining phase, they're still enjoying their food, meals are digesting well, I think out of the gates, add in a cardio session or two. Maybe you're running 2 or 3 a week in your gaining phase. Bump that to 4 or 5. Get the output going. Create the deficit through that when you're at your heaviest, when you're eating the most food, when the recovery capacity allows for the extra cardio, and then when food needs to be pulled, you're also in a better body composition. You're ahead because you hit the cardio hard out of the gates when you're able to. You can then pull out the cardio. Now this is especially applicable in a contest prep setting. We want to pull out that cardio closer to the show to start dropping off fatigue and sort of uphold the visual. We know when we get sort of close to stage condition, a lot of things, fatigue is very visible on the physique. Legs will start to fade. You'll look more watery as cortisol increases. So the further we can actually keep cardio away from show day, we can basically uphold a better look and produce a better look on stage. But that's only going to be able to be done if you're ahead of schedule, if you're ahead of fat loss. If you're behind on fat loss, you're gonna, at this rate, you're gonna be soft on stage. You're not gonna be in adequate condition. You're stupid if you're pulling your cardio out. You need to get the fat off. So what if you're heading into peak week fatigued? You're fat. You need to be fat free when it comes to getting on stage. But that is sort of how I like to run a deficit. Initially, out of the gates, maybe get a bit more cardio in there. Then towards when you're ahead towards the end of the prep, pull cardio out, drive that deficit purely through food, and keep fatigue at bay. Keep the fatigue monster away to sort of produce that best look possible. But to conclude, I really just wanted to wrap this one up with reminding you that cardio is more important while gaining than dieting, which seems so backward. But since you can drive the deficit through food, I really do think the sort of biofeedback and biomarker feedback improvement that you get. I'm just spamming words here, buzzwords. But the improvement on things like appetite, digestion, health, rest and heart rate, all these metrics, what you can get with that from a bit of cardio in the gaining phase is doing a lot more for you than the calorie burn you get from cardio in a deficit, because you can't do the same, you can't get that health outcome in a gaining phase with anything else, but you can get the deficit outcome through food when you're dieting. And a lot of people just do get this mixed up, but you do cardio in your gaining phase, biofeedback's going to be better, body composition is going to be better, you're going to be a better bodybuilder, trainer performance is going to be better. Ultimately, visual, it's what we want. We want to hold a good body composition and stay responsive to food. So if you can uphold that deficit in a dieting scenario without the CV, that is the way forward. But keep the CV in the gaining phase. So that is what I want to touch upon when it comes to cardio, and I'm going to leave you guys with this sort of um, takeaway of the fortnight. Yeah, let's say that takeaway the fortnight, since it's sort of 2 weeks between this and the last episode. But what I want to say is I have made a podcast on this, how detrimental off-plan meals are, and you might, if you do follow me on Instagram, you might remember the little story that I posted about this. And it's the fact that body composition, my body composition right now in this gaining phase, just over 40 weeks in, it has seen notable improvement with the reduction of off-plan meals. Now, in that podcast, another little plug, I said that it's not just calories in, calories out when it comes to these off-plan meals. It's the skewing of the macros. You're eating 80 grams of fat in one sitting. You're having a bolus feeding of poor quality food choices. It is going to affect your body composition. Even if calories banked are adequate, if you have 1,500 calories taken out of your meal plan to make room for a 1,500 calorie off plan meal, doesn't matter, you're still probably going to be a worse off bodybuilder eating the off plan meal, because of those things that I've just listed. Intaking 80 grams of fat isn't going to be synonymous with holding good body composition. I can say in the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks where I haven't had a proper off plan meal, notice the way I said meal, I've had a cookie. Or really since Milan last month, I haven't had a meal off. I have seen notable improvement in body composition, and that's simply down to keeping food quality high, choosing these good quality food sources. Insulin sensitivities definitely seen improvement. Just ticking boxes. There is a reason they're called off plan meals, and they should be kept at bay. You shouldn't be spamming them. And with this sort of last 4 to 5 weeks, body weight has been trending up, but the weight that's been added has been more positive. I look at my physique 4 weeks ago when I was having maybe the weekly off plan meal. I look worse, maybe 2 pounds lighter back then than I do now at 2 pounds heavier. So, real anecdotal evidence of the reduced frequency of off plan eating has, you know, aligned with better body composition. So wanted to leave you guys with that little takeaway that I've took from my own process the last month, and that will do it for another episode of the Faffing Over Frequency podcast. Faffing over the frequency of off-plan meals, maybe. But yeah, guys, if you did make it this far, audio should be all good compared to last week. I am looking at OBS right now, and it does say stop recording, so I have recorded through the Blue Yeti rather than the Osmo this week, so audio should be a lot better. So you did make it this far through, all the way to the end, please drop a like, comment, share, subscribe, stick it on your story. They're always much appreciated. Lifestyle Loops is getting tons and tons of shares. But that shows Faffing Over Frequency some love, guys. So hopefully you took some value from this one, and I shall see you in the next episode.